Well, I'm just wondering how many people in NATO are sticking, right? People are peeling off in NATO, aren't they?
Oh, behind the scenes, it's deeply divided. Are you kidding? I mean, the Germans right now, there's a quiet sense of rage growing inside the German electorate. They're beginning to figure out that this entire campaign that we've been waging against Russia is not only against Russia, it's against them. I mean, destroying this Nord Stream pipeline was a catastrophic error. We no longer were urging the Germans not to become too reliant on the Russians, which was always the warning. And of course, the Germans never accepted that because they saw no evidence and still see no evidence that the Russians are interested in going to war with them under any circumstances. You know, on the contrary, the Germans will be the first to tell you the Russians want desperately to do business with them in the West. So that was part of it. But then we decided that we would usurp their sovereignty. We would make the decision for them. We would end any further commerce with natural gas, oil, petroleum products, and so forth by destroying this Nord Stream 2. That's effectively an act of war against both Russia and Germany. And Germans now feel it. They understand what's been going on. They understand what we're doing. Now, I don't know where that's going to leave, but I rather expect that we're going to see a change in this government because the Germans were extremely unhappy with this Foreign Minister Baerbock's comment that Europe is at war with Russia. We in Germany are at war with Russia. The average German is horrified at that prospect, looks up and says, have you lost your mind? Just as most Germans question the wisdom of sending German military equipment to be used by Ukrainians to kill Russians, especially in view of the experience during World War II. So to say that NATO is more united and cohesive than it's ever been is sheer unadulterated nonsense. What the United States still has going for it is that, first of all, we have the financial system in our grasp. People don't want to be punished and cut out of global transactions because we decide we don't like them. But that's starting to ebb, and we're starting to see more and more Europeans behind the scenes say we've got to come up with a solution to this war because it's very obvious Washington and London will never, ever sign up.
You know, just listening to you talk, I was thinking of a show we did just very recently on East Palestine. And I covered a lot of environmental disasters, big ones, and Exxon Valdez and Love Canal, a bunch of other ones. And, that is going to be a sacrifice zone. They're not going to be able to fix that problem anytime soon for those people. And it's just, I almost get emotional about the idea that Ukraine is getting, what is it now, $100 billion or something? And these lovely working class American people are getting, they have to watch that happen. And, I almost feel like Biden and Trudeau here, and maybe Rishi too a bit are trying, it's almost like they're trying to provoke something within their own people. I mean, how long can people in the West suffer and struggle with prices and supply chain and all the shit left over from COVID while they shovel money and military hardware overseas? I mean, it's hard to fathom how long this can go on.
Well, it's going to be difficult to sustain it for much longer because our financial condition is very weak. We don't have the manufacturing base we once did. So the notion that we can rapidly recover from the economic downturn that we're in the middle of is fundamentally misleading. Everybody points to, well, look what we did when we came out of the Depression. Well, we had millions of people unemployed, something between 20 and 25% of the population, but we still had a huge manufacturing base. We had idle factories. We had vast areas where people could get labor, where they could go back to work.
Right.
We don't have that now, Trish. And in addition to everything else you mentioned, we brought in over the last year at least 2.5 to 3 million illegals. We haven't even begun to work on the larger plan of what do we do with the people that are already here in the United States who can't find work, or if they do find work, it's inadequate. It's not a living, and you can't just raise the hourly wage and say, okay, now you're being paid much more because we face inflation. And that is not going to rapidly dissipate, although we may actually go into a period of deflation, which in many ways is worse, depending upon how things go over the next few months. But the bottom line is that there's something else very sinister, and that is that there is this view that the American population, its core population, which is overwhelmingly white, and I would also add African, because the black population in this country has been here as long as the white population, that population deserves to be mistreated. Yeah. That somehow or another, if you fall into that white English speaking category, or if you are a black English speaking person and you're not part of their retinue, then you're the enemy. And it's very hard to escape that conclusion, because you have to look at the destruction of our monuments, the efforts to erase our history, to revise any notion of national identity. Recently, an order was issued that American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines should refrain from flying American flags at various events, everything from jumping out of airplanes to sports days. This is all very strange. When you look at East Palestine, look at the population, people are concluding, well, they're white people, and the administration doesn't want to do anything to help them. I mean, I can't imagine any previous administration not showing up immediately with FEMA, with emergency supplies, emergency
trailers,
support, everything.
Yeah. It's absolutely shocking and hard. I've never in my life seen governments hold their own people in as much disdain as we're seeing now. It's really, I really saw it during COVID, but this is really something. I want to ask you, did you see the NBC story where the chap, British accent, went into Crimea and started doing man in the street interviews, and they all said they wanted to be part of Russia again?
No, I haven't, but that's not really surprising. And the truth is that the vast majority of people who are now living in the areas that the Russian army controls are very happy to be part of Russia.
Yes,
people forget that almost 2 million people left Ukraine for Russia as refugees before this even got off the ground. The major fight that we're in now. And that's in addition to the over 8 to 9 million that went west. This is the other tragedy that doesn't come up for discussion. And that is that Ukraine's population, which started out at probably 37.4 million, is somewhere down between 18 and 22 million. Millions of people have left the country. Hundreds of thousands have been killed. The economy is at a standstill. It's been virtually destroyed. 40% of Ukrainian cities are at least partially damaged. And that doesn't even begin to address industry. And of course, the Russians are now controlling the part of Ukraine where virtually 99% of its industrial output is located, along with most of the mineral resources, coal, steel production, rare earths, and so forth. Certainly natural gas. In fact, the natural gas field under Ukraine and Western Russia is thought to be larger at this point than the natural gas field off the coast of Norway, which would make it the largest in Europe. All of this is at a standstill. Nothing can be done. Nothing is growing. I can't imagine anything worse. And you would think that all the governments of Europe would be horrified and would insist on some sort of end to this. But there's none whatsoever.
Well, I guess the next big check is going to be for a rebuild, right? There'll be nothing left. It'll be a smoking, deserted ruins. And then America and the rest of us will be, asked to give yet more and more to rebuild this country that nasty old Putin destroyed. It's incredible to me. Is there, in your view, because I know there's been a lot of kind of, it's been, the talk around peace talks has been hinky. I can never kind of follow what is actually going on. There were some that were reported on by Agence France-Presse about eight months ago or something. Is there a possibility that there will be official talks, or do you feel even that there are diplomatic conversations going on behind the scenes now? Is it possible?
It's possible. I'm not aware of any serious conversations at all. To go back to your previous point about rebuilding Ukraine, there's supposedly a plan to spend $345 billion rebuilding Ukraine. And of course, that money is supposed to be laundered through or filtered through, however you want to put it, BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and all the usual suspects who can't wait to get their hands on Ukraine's meager resources and ultimately are behind the attempt to bring down Russia and take all of Russia's resources. So that seems to be serious, and that's well underway. And you've got a lot of people in Washington who really believe that by preventing, quote unquote, Russia from winning in Ukraine, we will destroy Russia. I don't see any evidence for that. So the first thing to get through our heads is that this is not something Russia will lose. No matter how hard we think we make it on them, this is not going to be lost. The reason is very simple. It's an existential question for the Russians.
Yeah.
It would be the same for us in Mexico. Would we allow northern Mexico to become a battleground for a foreign enemy, whether it was Chinese or Russian or something else, to build up a huge Mexican army, equip it, train it with the most lethal weaponry we can find, and then hurl it at us with the goal of liberating, say, New Mexico or Arizona or Southern California? What would we do? I rather suspect that we would react far more violently than the Russians have. And that's really what confronts Russia right now. So this is not going to end anytime soon. There are some ways to end it, but I don't think there is any incentive to sit down and talk with the Russians at this point. I think the Russians are going to have to demonstrate conclusively that Ukraine's position is hopeless. And the only way to do that, in my judgment, is to sweep out of southern Ukraine, sweep north and west, ending up across the river from Kiev, and then to bring the 150,000 Russian troops that are up in White Russia down into western Ukraine on the other side of Kiev. And when it becomes clear that those forces are arrayed that way, then I think you will get peace talks. But until that happens, no, this will drag on indefinitely.